Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at 5 Things to Watch Out Before Trusting an AI Vendor webinar. My name is Teresa Liao, and I am the Director of Content here at ASAPP. I'll be doing the intro and then go through some housekeeping items before I pass it on to our speaker today, Alisher. So here are a few housekeeping items before we start the webinar. I know everyone will be asking this. This webinar will be recorded and you will receive the on-demand video tomorrow in email. So look out for that link in the email. Also, the public chat is open right now. Our team members will be interacting and sharing resources in the chat throughout the webinar. One that's really hot on the press today is the generative AI agents. Key questions to ask every solution provider, and that goes really well with Alisher's talk today. There are 8 questions in that document that you should ask every single AI vendor, so make sure to download a copy. Finally, if you have any questions, please leave the questions in the Q&A section. We will leave some time for questions at the end of the webinar. If we don't get to your questions, someone will follow up with you afterward. So I would like to introduce our speaker today. Our speaker is Alisher Yuldashev. Alisher is the head of security and privacy assurance at ASAPP. As a seasoned trust assurance professional specializing in AI safety assurance, he is managing a team of security, privacy, and compliance professionals, building trust with ASAP's customers and prospects, and managing governance and risk. Prior to ASAP, Alisher worked at a Big Four accounting consulting firm where he led teams on various technology risks and security consulting engagements and audits. Thank you so much, Alisher, and I will pass it on to you.
Thanks, Teresa. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Let me know when you'll be able to see the slides. We can get started. Okay. Okay, I think the slide should be up. So again, as Teresa mentioned, my name is Alisher Yuldashev. This is a combination of different things that I think are relevant and important for you to consider. At any point in time, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt, and then we can try to address all of them. So, firstly, about the title, when you think about what are the things to watch out for when you're trying to trust your data to AI vendors, you're trying to engage with AI vendors, I would actually try to reframe it differently. I think it's important to know how to be smart when your brand reputation is bet on the novel AI promise. Over the past several years, we've seen the spike of AI and all of the capabilities that are out there, and a large number of vendors rising who make different types of promises. And I think it's important to make sure that you're not going to get misguided by any of those promises and know how to distinguish vendors apart. In today's presentation, we're going to cover a number of things. The first one is to really understand why is it important? What is the current AI vendor landscape? What are the top 5 things to watch out for, as you probably saw in the webinar advertisement? Understanding the trustworthiness of AI vendors, because that's very important, and their level of care for your brand. We will also talk about some red flags that you need to be watch out for, and I'll also walk you through a practical application of some of the discussed points in a walkthrough like scenario. I built this presentation as a helpful conversation for us to engage, and my goal is to give you some practical advice to consider. Hopefully, you can walk away with useful strategies when you're considering your next AI vendor. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. So with that said, let's get started. So why this matters? Why is it important? Well, first, briefly about me. My name is Alisher, and as you figure out already, I work at ASAP. Plenty of times I've been on both sides of the customer vendor relationships. I was also sometimes a third wheel as a consultant or an advisor to an interaction between a potential customer and vendor. And even now, I engage actively with our prospects and customers and dealing with AI vendors a ton. If you're interested to learn more about customer vendor partnerships in general, you're welcome to review a podcast that I've done on that topic a few months ago. You can find it on my LinkedIn profile. I'll be sharing my LinkedIn profile towards the end of the presentation. So, why does this matter? Well, to start, there's obviously plenty of AI vendors out there. Your inbox is probably drowning in different AI pitches right this second. We can do this, we can do that. Many promises are being made, and maybe a few of them are even kept. Um, Lots of vendors with an AI-enabled products, different kind of vendors, and it's an impactful technology. Why? To be effective in leveraging this beautiful and revolutionary technology for the benefit of your organization and to accomplish your goals. This is why this matters. There are a number of challenges that we all face, and one of them, probably a critical one, is how to differentiate between different types of AI vendors and their true capabilities. Vendors promise solutions as far as, hey, AI can make your food, but let's face it, distinguishing between genuine AI capabilities and overhyped marketing, it's very hard. As practice shows, the high rate of AI implementation uh, doesn't necessarily result in expected return on investments. There are sometimes noticeable gaps between pilots and the actual successful production deployments. So the stakes are high as well. Why? Well, with the current potential for data breaches and model breaches or theft, which is a specific concern for AI, breaches happen with technology that most businesses understand really well today, with vendors that have been around for a while, with the technologies that have been around for a while. So, what can we expect from a technology such as AI that's only a selected few understand really well? And even those who really understand AI as a technology and its capabilities not always have all the answers. How do you navigate this challenges? How do you navigate this different vendors? Well, that's why vendor assessment matters. That's why it's important to consider the specifics of your vendor assessment program for AI vendors in the modern AI age. Think of it as like a translation of gibberish or very kind of different confusing language to plain and simple English that is could be easily understood by many. Moving on to next slide. So on this slide, you could see that I tried to list all AI vendors and place them into four different buckets. There are plenty of different vendors, and honestly, it's very hard to put those vendors into specific buckets or groups. But I try to give you my vision of that. So as you can see, there are so-called tech giants. There are specialized firms. There are startups and open source. And as you can see, the actual pitch between different categories of vendors varies. Some promise that it's a comprehensive suite of AI or it's an end-to-end business solution. Someone says, hey, we understand your domain, we understand your industry really, really well. Some say, hey, our AI is so unique and innovative and cutting edge, no one else does that. While others try to say that our AI is free to use, there is a large support or dev community to engage with and to leverage. Pitches vary. However, it's important to acknowledge that they're not mutually exclusive. And the ones I listed here, I find being most common and defining for each of these four categories that I called out. Now, promise, it often includes this and that. I won't read each of those promises. I'm sure you can review them easily right away or afterwards. Also, please know that I do call often reality. And the reason why I call it often reality is that sometimes this happens, however, not always. And frankly, that often reality part is not even bad. It's not necessarily something evil. It's just different from what was originally promised by a particular vendor. A common theme of the promise is revolution, easeability of use, rapid results, high ROIs, and things like that. However, in reality, it's often way more complex. Timelines take longer, and you always need some level of expertise. Therefore, the very first thing that I think you need to do is to assess the claims that vendor is making against your specific business needs. So, like a quick tip, if possible, get specific measurable impacts in use cases and try to get references, not hypothetical scenarios. So, vendors who can say, hey, we have this specific customer where we've done that, and that customer is willing to engage with you, is a good way to validate the promises that the vendor makes. Important things to look for. Well, firstly, is this promise self stated, or is someone else validating that? Is it market tested? Is there measurable data available, or maybe successful past implementations, as I mentioned before? A simple check you could do, you could just go to the website of the particular AI vendor and look for logos, right? You've seen these days it's very popular to put logos of customers and really just qualify the vendor or ask them if each one of those logos are the actual production deals. Because what I've seen happening a lot is a vendor might engage with a company, do a POC, maybe it's even free POC, and then get the logo, hopefully with proper authorization on their website, just to make you feel that this company decided to choose their AI product, when in reality, the company maybe just decided to test the technology, but they're not committed either contractually or financially to actually use that technology in production. As there are good people all around the globe, right? It's a good analogy is the way I think about it. Each of these categories of vendors have good vendors that could be trusted, that are reliable, compared to some other vendors in the same category. And I think this landscape is just helpful for you to navigate, so you could use it as a frame of reference when you think about your current or next AI vendors. And you can look at it at a macro level with respect to the type of promise they make, and make sure that that promise is aligned with what you're looking for or what you're seeing this vendor provides as a proven result. So now going into the five things of looking at AI vendors that you need to watch out for. The first one, and I'll actually quote someone else here. So there was a recent study done by Cloud Data Platform company. It's a big one. Hopefully, you can guess the name. So they discovered that only 22% of companies asked said that their data strategy was truly ready to support generative AI. So if you think about it, they've asked 100% of a particular group of companies, and only about 20% of those companies said, hey, our data is ready. Why am I using this as an example? Is because the first and foremost thing you want to consider when you're looking at a vendor is understanding what is their data management practice, what kind of privacy measures and data protection measures they have in place. As you probably know, there is a large number of different regulations, both here in US and internationally, that expect certain ways to manage data, that expect certain requirements that the company need to satisfy when processing certain kinds of data, especially when it comes down to sensitive data. So getting a good understanding of that, getting a transparency from a vendor with respect to how they're going to actually use your data, especially if that data is being used for any kind of machine learning training, or fine tuning or retrieval augmented generation, is very important. By the way, in all three of those cases, the data usage might be different. So you need to clearly know how that AI vendor is planning to use your data, what they're going to do with it, how they're going to utilize that data to improve their existing ML models to deliver results that they committed to deliver to you. Next thing to call out is, again, going back to the policies and regulations, are things like data residency, cross border data transfer policies. That is also very important, especially if you're dealing with vendors who are either based internationally or you operate internationally. So you might have some international laws and regulations to consider. I've recently seen some stats, and that was maybe 2, 3 months ago, so that might be outdated. That there are about 250 to 300 AI specific and AI applicable laws and regulations that exist today. Imagine 250 to 300, and that's about 2, 3 months ago, so maybe now even more. Of course, they're at different stages of actual implementation. Some of them they're just being drafted. Some of them are in effect. Some of them will come into effect in near to short term future. I think there are about 15 different regulations, maybe even more again, that are specific to generative AI. Now, this is at a global scale. So not all of those regulations might be applicable to the companies that, let's say, base and operate purely in US, but that's a factor that you need to consider. So there might be regulations that are specific to industry that obviously you're aware of, geography, or maybe even specific use case where you're planning to apply AI. Key thing here is be careful to who you entrust your data to. You want to make sure that that vendor has proper AI safety and security measures in place. And that's the watch out number two. The first thing to consider, and maybe I'll just call it out when we talk about AI specific safety or security measures, is actually a recent blog post by Kash Kiani. He is our head of trust, security, and IT, where he further explains the difference between AI safety and AI security in a very nice form. You need to consider things like bias management and what are the respective mitigations. This question comes up a lot. Is data that is being used to, let's say, fine tune a given model that you provided to a vendor, is that data bias? Is the model bias? Is there bias created during the actual training or fine tuning or augmentation of the model or not? That's an important factor to consider, especially again knowing that being biased towards something is a very specific AI safety concern that is currently being elevated more and more by existing regulations. You need to be seeking for explainability and interpretability of AI models. What I mean by that is you need to know how vendors' AI is actually doing certain things, what level of transparency they have. Again, there are certain regulations that prohibit, let's say, companies in financial services industries to leverage black box, black box AI systems when there is a decision that is being made by AI system without clearly knowing how that decision was arrived to, as an example. You also want to know how that AI model actually operates in a given scenario, right? So we'll talk a bit more about like model validation and testing, but making sure that the actual uh, scenarios or real use case scenarios are being tested before the AI product goes live for you. You need to consider certain fail-safes mechanisms and things like human oversight, right? Human oversight, often referred to as human in the loop. It's basically considerations when you have a human being engaged during different stages of ML model usage. It could be during the training phase, in cases such as supervised learning. It could be actual during the production runtime of a particular AI product or service offering. You need to consider things like how does this vendor manages hallucinations? How do they handle input and output safety, data leakage, things around API safety and API security, assuming that you would be engaging with that vendor's AI products through certain APIs. Data protection baselines. It's important to know that besides AI specific safety measures, you need to be aware that a large number of foundational security, privacy, and compliance risks that are applicable to different technologies are also applicable to AI. So you want to make sure that you have a strong foundation around that. Now, remember AI in the world of AI safety. It's not just a buzzword. You probably saw that there are a number of large, very famous brands of LLM or similar type of AI companies that have been emerging recently, as early as earlier this year and several years before, where they intentionally focus on things like AI safety and AI security as the baseline of their products. I'm sure you know the companies that I'm referring to. Now, moving on really quickly, let me check if we have any questions so far. Okay. Teresa, do we have any questions to address? Okay, I see that the questions are being addressed. So, Teresa, if you don't mind, like if anyone has a question for me, please stop so I could look at them and respond right away. Okay, so the watch out number three, again, I mentioned that before. When we think about the actual model development and quality assurance process, it's important to understand how vendor does that, right? It's important to know how vendor performs model evaluations and validation. Uh, Vendors should, like, as whenever vendor develops any kind of technology, you'd expect them to follow certain SDLC or change management or similar type of procedures to make sure that the code they develop, that the technology they develop, it works as intended. So same concept applies when models are being developed or trained or fine-tuned for specific use cases. Make sure that when the model validation is happening, uh, that you pre-agree the evaluation criteria upfront with the vendor, so you know, hey, this is how we're gonna ensure that this model is effective or not, that it's hitting the expected performance metric or not, right? So you should avoid dealing with vendors if when you ask them how do you validate your models, they say, hey, we just ask someone to monitor it, right? That's very vague, that's very generic. You want to avoid doing that. Or also if the vendor is being very shy and doesn't want to share too much about how they do model evaluation, and they hide behind statements like, hey, this is not for disclosure, this is our secret sauce, probably that's not a good sign. Of course, vendors might be different. Some vendors are more transparent than others, but generally you'd want your vendors to be more transparent with you because they're using a new, sometimes untested technology that hasn't been around for a long time, and you want to make sure that you're comfortable actually embracing that technology in your company. What's important to know is how the actual monitoring of AI model happens, right? So monitoring, you can think of it as a fitness tracker, step counter. So I use one of those. I'm sure a lot of you use different type of step counters, so you just use your phone, right? So you can think of it that continuous monitoring should include mechanisms or performance metrics that are being monitored to, for example, identify hallucinations or certain anomalies, and then flagging the problematic, unexpected behaviors either internally to the vendor and hopefully with some visibility to you and your team. If vendor does it, great. If vendor can give you access to some of the dashboards where they perform such monitoring so you could be engaged and you can observe, that's even better. Remember, uh, the solid model development and quality assurance process is often a difference between a very helpful AI enabled product and a product that's just a recipe for disaster. Your vendor should do their development process, their model development process with care. And you should feel free to challenge the vendor and ask them more and more about their model development and quality assurance process. Next thing to watch out for is how much vendor is being transparent and how much vendor is being accountable for what they share with you. So you need to consider that when we talk about transparency, and there's been a rise in need for transparency over the past maybe 5, 10, 20 years. We saw things like SOX being enforced about 20 years ago or so. On top of that, there are a large number of other things. Right now, a lot of public companies they need to disclose uh, the matters related to cybersecurity in the uh, financial documents, right? So there is a trend to be more transparent, and AI should be subject to a high level of transparency. Now, it's important to know that vendor transparency is not only about being transparent about the product, but also the vendor being transparent with you about their practices, about how they do certain things, how they manage security and safety, and things like that. Things that could help with that is knowing that this vendor is going or went through certain third party audits where they basically invited a third party and that third party performed certain level of assessments and measured certain controls and certain existing practices and policies and then have a report to share with you. A lot of vendors they would be open to go through your rigor vendor assessments, so you should make sure that you do that. You should make sure that you involve your AI steering committee or similar governing bodies if you have when you're engaging with AI vendor to fully assess the risks and really get to understand their technology. Um, they also need to consider vendors and their respective track record of past performance, especially when it comes down to issues and managing the issues. If you look at a vendor and you know that they had certain customers for a longer duration, that's usually a good indication that at the time when they had issues, probably those issues were effectively resolved. So the customer didn't decide to leave that vendor and things like that. And obviously communication. It's important that vendor communicates with you. That's I think that's very important. Now, with transparency and accountability, don't think of them as nice to have. I think they need to exist there. And in order to be transparent with you, vendor or AI vendor also needs to be aligned with you and your organization. Now, what I mean by alignment. So this slide is a bit unique. It's unique in a sense that it might not be the first thing that comes to mind when you think about an AI vendor, but I think this should be among the things you consider very, very early. Even though like terms such as ethical AI or AI ethics or responsible AI are sometimes difficult to really unpack and like understand what do they really mean, what do they really expect, you need to consider how a particular vendor aligns with your corporate values and goals. Easy way to do that is to consider how fanatic is this vendor about doing the right thing? If vendor's idea about doing something ethical is, well, whatever keeps us out of the court, probably that's not the right kind of vendor to engage with, especially when we talk about AI vendors. The next one is pretty simple. Every organization has some level of risk tolerance and respective risk appetite, and you want to get a vendor that has a comparable risk tolerance. Typically, you don't want to engage with the vendors who can easily accept or tolerate way more risk than your company can, without rightfully assessing what is the impact of that vendor accepting incremental risk to you as their customer and to your clients and to your data. The reason why this is important is a lot of times vendors, especially with novel technology, they are being they're willing to accept higher risks, and sometimes they could do that and unintentionally cause a potential risk or harm to your organization. So level setting on, hey, this is the level of risk we're accepting at a certain uh, areas, and making sure that the vendor understands and aligns with that is very important. Lastly, consider how flexible this vendor is. You want the vendor to be flexible enough so they can shape this new AI technology towards the best business outcome that possibly could be accomplished for your company. Obviously, like with any other technology, if there is too much customization, over customization, that can come at a higher cost. Therefore, it needs to be well balanced. But typically, you'd want to go with vendors who can customize the technology more towards your specific use case, just because those vendors and those solutions, they haven't been around for a while. So there are not a lot of different existing ways to that are existing and fit to solve a specific problem. In a different domain where there's been a lot of previous use cases, vendors might have some standard solutions that proved over time to be a really good solution for any particular problem, but probably not with AI products. Now, after talking about this five things you need to watch out for, a conclusion that you're trying to reach is this AI vendor, is it trustworthy? Can I trust my data to that vendor? Do I want to engage with that vendor? And again, there are certain things that are pretty common, such as industry certifications, compliance standards, different kind of assessments, reports, and things like that. You could also ask certain specific things that can help you to further distinguish or make a decision if you consider that vendor as a trustworthy. The first one is production deals. Again, as I mentioned, right? Does the vendor have the product in production with any customers? Not a POC, not a pilot project, but actually in production, right? And unless it's a very industry agnostic product, in which case is it too generic for use case? Uh, you want to seek vendors who have production deployments in your respective industry, because industry knowledge often plays a huge role in having AI as an effective enabler to accomplish your business outcomes. Also, do they have long-standing clients? I think I mentioned that before. If they have clients in production and they have clients who's been around with that vendor for longer duration, that's usually an indicator of a more trustworthy vendor. Now, another thing to consider, and we spoke about that with watch out number one, is how your data is being used, especially when it comes down to any kind of training of custom machine learning models. Is the vendor transparent? Are they ready to put the commitment of how they're going to use your data in writing, in contract or similar type of document, and are they willing to follow it? And are they ready to demonstrate with respective artifacts if requested that they are following what they committed to. Also consider which machine learning or large language models, if we talk about uh, subset of generative AI, what type of AI is being used, what licenses do they have, where is the actual AI system hosted, is vendor transparent about potential risks and what is their respective mitigations, and do they share with you what type of limitations they currently have. Again, if vendor says we could do everything, our AI is one ring that rules them all, then probably it's very unlikely. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's very unlikely. If vendor says, well, our product is really good for solving that problem, but for that problem we don't know, or maybe it's not as good but it can become better if we want to work together on that, that vendor to me seems a bit more trustworthy because they're being transparent with you. And lastly, again, talking about transparency, to what extent they are willing to share with you their AI safety and security insights, how easily they just share information with you. So to me, these are the typical indicators of vendors' trustworthiness that you need to consider. Uh, I'll pause here. Any questions, Teresa?
Yeah, I think we have a couple questions
Yes.
before go further. So, the first question is for companies considering a co-pilot type of implementation, which vendors have the best track record of security and privacy, i.e., not breaching client data for their own training models, or is the only way around this to build on top of a FM? Foundational model.
Yes.
And I don't think we can name specific vendors, but I would say that is there something that you can guide this particular audience member on when using Copilot type of implementation?
Yeah, I would agree. I think generally sharing specific vendor names, I don't think it's something that I would do. Right? Again, I don't want to, you know, give any favorites or say this vendor is better than this one, right? Because it depends on the size of your company, on the size of the vendor, on the specific use case where you want to use that vendor, on the type of data that vendor will have, on the integration you'll have with the vendor, right? So there are so many factors that can move scales of the weights to one vendor over the other. Hopefully, what I'm sharing with you through this webinar would be helpful as some practical advice. Again, at the end, I'm planning to just walk through the whole framework that I've been presenting here, kind of like end to end again as a recap. So hopefully that's going to be helpful. So yeah, that's probably my response.
Thank you. And the next one is how do I, the CX client, rigorously verify the promises of various vendors on hallucination? So this question specifically about hallucination. What hallucination rates, accuracy rates are needed for effective customer experience AI? How achievable is this now? So I guess this question is trying to get at what is the standard rate that people should be looking for, or that does the rate matter, or is there something else that they need to be thinking about when it comes to hallucination? How AI companies address hallucination. I know that the companies say hallucination is we eliminated hallucinations. That it's not a trustworthy company because it's a natural part of the LAM. But what can this particular audience member do?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, Teresa. So I agree that I think if a vendor promises that hey, zero hallucinations, probably it's unlikely, right? Again, I'm not gonna say that's completely not possible, but it's very unlikely. I think also trying to come up with certain metric and then using this as a baseline is probably not the way I would do it. The way I would approach it is I would consider what is acceptable to me, what kind of hallucinations are acceptable to me. So let's say if I have a specific use case and uh, a vendor AI product will hallucinate with something that is uh, harmless, I would treat that very differently from a vendor's AI product hallucinating with something that is harmful. And the difference is, let's say, a harmless hallucination is maybe an unexpected word in a sentence or in a response, where even if the end consumer sees it and understands it's AI responding, that's not going to create harm. A harmful hallucination, on contrary, would be a case where, let's say, vendor's AI would hallucinate another customer's name or anything sensitive related to that customer, that customer, I mean that your company, right? That it wasn't supposed to disclose to that particular consumer or customer that is interacting with your product. I think to manage hallucinations well, there are different factors here again to consider. It's important to have some level of uh, uh, expected boundaries, right? So a lot of times when we talk about this, we talk about what kind of boundaries does a particular, especially when it comes down to generative AI, uh, uh, product has, right? And the boundaries are defined as a scope of permitted responses, and you can define that scope for a particular use case. Hey, here's use case. You can define that scope by setting specific guardrails, let's say through RAG, through retrieval augmented generation. You can define this by giving access or not giving access to specific APIs, and things like that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Two more quick questions, and I know you have some additional slides that we will wrap up for the presentation. So, you mentioned safety and security earlier. Can you quickly summarize what is the difference between AI safety and AI security? And we pointed audience to that blog post as well, but it would be great if you summarize in a couple sentences.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and this is just my definition, right? The way I think about it is that AI safety is has to do more with AI following a responsible, being a responsible actor, right? So AI not doing anything unethical, AI not creating, like certain bias or again, so hallucinations to me would be more a matter of safety because it has to do with how much your AI or vendor's AI product would be performing and operating the function that it was assigned to perform. So to me, this is safety, right? AI safety is, hey, this AI is supposed to be responding, let's say, as an agent of a particular company. So if that AI is responding as an agent of a particular company, that is a safer AI compared to agent who's supposed to do that, but it's not doing that, or it's responding with something outside of the scope, right? So on security, on other hand, it's more foundational. And if you remember, I mentioned it has to do with dealing with malicious threats, with dealing with bad actors, right? So cases where someone tries to either utilize uh, uh, some gaps in the current AI product to either extract certain data or to manipulate the behavior of AI system, right? Basically leading to loss of data integrity or data exfiltration, right? To me, this is more security. So security is more aligned with the previous security risks that you see at any company, how access is managed, how data is encrypted, is it being redacted,
Right.
uh, what's the data retention and things like that, versus safety is more around functional alignment of AI product uh, to what it's actually doing.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we have one final question at the moment. What are your thoughts on the effectiveness of a SOC 3 assessment certification of an AI vendor when it comes to the organization's data security and privacy?
SOC 3.
Yes.
Okay. So I think, just generally speaking, right? If you think about ACPA's SOC 3, it's not that different for AI product versus non AI product, right? It will, and the flexibility of just SOCs in general, SOCs in general, under ASCPA, is that companies, they can define their own controls as long as they satisfy respective control objectives and they map to points of focus. I use the terminology, but I assume the person who is asking it is familiar with terminology from SOC, from
Mhm.
ASCPA. So the, so because of that, there could be leverage of some of the AI specific risks within SOC. However, very likely that if you want to address certain AI specific things, again, like for example, hallucination, is going to be hard to map hallucination to a specific trust principles or criteria under AICPA,
Mhm.
even though maybe it's possible. Right now, I think SOC 3, between SOC 3 and SOC 2, right, is just who is the audience, right? So uh, yeah, so I think it can be a good start, and it's better to have SOC 3 or SOC 2 for that matter. But there are other things that are emerging there. ISO came up with 42001 standard, and I know that a lot of companies are currently undergoing through the process of being certified in ISO 42001, as an example. There is also AI risk management framework that was published by NIST probably about a year ago, well, maybe even more now. So that could also be a good reference for a company to make sure that you properly manage AI risks.
Perfect. From my understanding is also that certification shouldn't be the only thing people look for, right? Like when you talks about third party audit and engagement and whatnot, certification alone, I mean it's good, a good like okay checkbox, but what the vendor actually does has a lot of implications as well, not just the certification alone.
Absolutely. And I think what's important to consider, often I see that companies, they get, let's say, SOC 2 or SOC 3 from a vendor, and they don't really look at the details to see, hey, does it actually cover the respective product that I'm planning to purchase from that vendor, right? Because technically, uh, again, ACPA's SOC reports, they are specific to given system. So in system description section, there would be specific systems that are subject to that, right? Often companies might or individuals might misclassify it as that, hey, that company has, let's say, SOC 2. That means all of their products are covered. In reality, that's not the case.
Great, thank you so much. I know you have a few more slides, so let's go through the slides and then we can wrap this up.
Absolutely. And I'll try to speed up a bit so we can have a bit more time for additional questions. But here are some of the red flags that I observed. Now, they don't necessarily mean that you should stop immediately talking to that vendor. However, you at least want to maybe pause and think, right? So, like, why this vendor does things that way? Like, is there a reason? And maybe there is a legitimate business reason that you're comfortable with. Um, so the first one is, again, I mentioned that quite a few times. Our AI does it all, right? It's a promise that it's a digital Swiss Army knife of some sort. When vendor claims that the AI can do everything, I don't know, from predicting stocks to making your coffee, right? Probably that should give you a pause. Uh, in real world, effective and working AI solutions are typically specialized to a given problem domain. In other words, if it sounds too good to be true, it's probably is. Again, maybe unless they develop Skynet, in which case we have much bigger problems to worry about. The second red flag is, and I think that was one of the questions as well, a promise that a particular AI solution is very accurate or any other kind of inflated evaluation metrics, right? Like, hey, we're 0% hallucinations type of statements, right? Or we will 10x this and that, right? You know what I mean? You probably saw this, that type of promises that different vendors might make. Now, if you're familiar with, how scientific experiments are typically done, right? So typically you'd have like a baseline for any metric. So you need to understand, okay, what was the corpus of data that is being used to actually make that statement? what samples were picked, which were the samples that were ignored, right? Because to an extent, by scoping in, scoping out, framing, making assumptions, you can really go and accomplish different things with any metric, right? So I think really important to understand how those metrics were actually uh, derived, and obviously making sure that they can back them, right? Otherwise, I mean, I think getting something at absolute 100%, especially when it comes down to things like LLMs, which we know are probabilistic, right? I think it's very difficult. Next one is, that's my favorite one. It's the magical dataless AI, right? It's the case where vendor says, hey, we don't need your data. Everything's going to work just as is out of the box, right? You know that data is essential. It's like a lifeblood of any AI technology. The big LLMs that we're all aware of, they were trained on large and vast amount of data that was sourced from different public and private sources. So if a vendor suggests that they can deliver amazing results without leveraging your proprietary data, it's usually one of two things. They might be oversimplifying the process and maybe hoping that they'll get some of that data in future, or and hopefully they don't do it without you knowing, or their solution that they'll offer you could be very generic. Now, that's not necessarily a problem. Maybe the generic solution is good enough to satisfy your needs. But again, I think it's important. Data is probably the biggest thing you need to be mindful of when it comes down to AI vendors. The next one is that once you configure it, it's done. You just put it in the oven approach. It seems convenient, but in reality, that's not what's happening, right? With any kind of technology, there is obviously some level of monitoring, some level of support and maintenance that is needed. And good AI solution on top of that will require certain levels of monitoring. If it's automated, that's even better. Uh, Periodic reevaluations of the model performance in certain cases of degrading model performance, which can happen over time with any model, uh, making incremental model improvements, training or fine tuning, and things like that. And then the last one is vendor stating that we're totally secure, the pinky promise of cybersecurity of the vendor and their model. Obviously, we live in the age where things like that, like anything is vulnerable. Any system is vulnerable by default. It's just how unvulnerable that system could be made, right? That's the key thing, right? So you hear that big brands being breached all the time. You hear it in the news. You read it in the articles. So it's something that needs to be considered. And if vendor will tell you you shouldn't worry about security, probably you need to ask why. You'd rather want a vendor who would say, yes, we understand security is important for you, and we are comfortable sharing with you enough information so then you can get comfortable that we're taking good care of your data. Okay. Assuming the vendor didn't trigger any red flags, there are ways of putting this together, and this is where we're moving next. So, if I think about an example of how I would apply this five watch outs for, right? Again, it's as much art as it is a science. So, one thing maybe to call out is, again, the size of your company. I think I mentioned that to one of the questions that was asked. The size of the company, your company, and the vendor, the details of implementation, how it's done, what type of integration there is, where model lives, what is the use case that you are actually trying to solve with AI product, what kind of APIs that AI product will have with your systems, what kind of data it will be given. All of those are important variables, and all of them they could make a difference. So you need to be mindful when you make your choices. Um, now, I'd first, so if I'd have to go and look at a new AI vendor, I'd first go and again look at their data management and privacy practice. What do they do with our data? Are they going to use it for any kind of ML training, fine tuning, augmentation, etc.? What's their data residency? What's their data retention looks like, and things like that. Uh, is the vendor aligned to existing privacy regulations? Is the vendor aligned or on track to be aligned with AI specific laws and regulations that are popping up? Right. So just collecting that information. I then go into again the comprehensive view of proper mitigation of novel AI risks, as well as security measures. Right, the foundational security measures. Again, managing bias, explainability of AI outputs, of the decisions that AI system makes if you intend that AI system to make certain decisions, existence of fail-safe protocols, monitoring, having human in the loop or other mechanisms is also important to consider. Uh, I'd also move to really understand what's their model development and quality assurance processes. By the way, this is not a sequential, so you don't have to do it in that sequence, right? That's just following the sequence that I've been presenting on, right? All of this could be done in parallel or in different sequence. Um so, uh, model development, again, what kind of validations are done? What is the pre-launch testing protocols of a particular, so pre-go live testing protocols? Are they doing respective simulations, real life scenario simulations before they're launching, right? Because this technology is new, a lot of times, a lot of outcomes they cannot be predicted upfront. So it's not like your traditional tests. You could just write tests upfront, and if those tests pass, then you're good, right? You need to be very very open and very considerate when considering use cases. Understanding how transparent is vendor and how accountable that vendor is, and making sure that the vendor aligns with corporate values, making sure again that they committed to respective ethical AI practices, that the risk tolerance of that vendor somewhat close to yours, or if they're willing to tolerate higher risk, there are proper measures in place to make sure that you're not going to be subject to any potential negative consequences if vendor decides to tolerate a high risk and for some reason that will backfire. So, with that said, again, key takeaways. It's important that you execute proper due diligence with any vendor, right? That not only AI vendor. With AI vendors, it's even more important. So, I don't know, multiply the importance of your vendor assessments when you're dealing with AI vendors by 10, by 50, by 100. We spoke about five things to watch out for, or rather, five things to consider. And again, not this is not all inclusive list, so there might be other considerations, but hopefully this webinar was helpful to significantly increase your chances of engaging with the right AI vendor, the vendor that's not going to cost your company much pain down the road. Um, Last thing to say, it's an important decision, especially if you're willing to bet your brand reputation, your company goals, and your critical organizational data on the novel AI promise. Thank you.
Thank you, Alisher. So we are actually pretty much tight on time. So I want to take this opportunity. Nikki, I know we have a question about summarizing, and we can take that offline. To follow up with you. But I just want to thank everyone for joining us. I want to thank Alisher for you to put this presentation with together, and also to share your insights with us. For anyone who is interested in a kind of list of questions, we have this PDF, Generative AI Agents, Key Questions to Ask. Please feel free to download it and use that for your evaluation. But otherwise, thank you so much, and look out for the email with the on-demand link, and we'll see you next time. Thank you all.